The wind hit without warning. They snapped me open too fast. My ribs took the shock. Metal stretched. Fabric pulled tight. I held. Rain came sideways, cold, heavy, relentless. It hammered against my canopy and slid down in sheets. The hand gripping my handle tightened as the gusts tried to rip me backward. I leaned into it. That's what I was built for.
The pressure never asks if you're ready. It just arrives. They pushed me forward into the storm, angling me against the wind. My joints clicked under strain. One hinge stuck for half a second before locking into place. No one noticed. They never do.
Water pooled in my seams longer than it used to. The stitching absorbed it instead of repelling it cleanly. It felt heavier than last season. The fabric sagged slightly between ribs, just enough to change the tension pattern. Still functional, still holding. Cars passed. Tires cut through flooded streets. The rain intensified. A gust bent me sharply backward, flipping one rib almost inside out before I snapped back into position. The hand cursed, not at me, at the weather. I was shoved forward again.
The force traveled through my shaft into the grip. I absorbed it, redirected it, distributed it along 8 metal ribs that had been opened and closed thousands of times. Each hinge carried a memory of strain. Each joint had learned where to give. One rib didn't return to perfect alignment. It sat slightly off angle, barely visible, a subtle distortion in the circle I formed overhead. I noticed. It meant nothing.
Rain slowed. They closed me with a sharp twist. The mechanism scraped as it retracted. A faint grinding noise. My spring hesitated before collapsing fully. The sound was new. No one reacted. I was shaken once, twice. Water sprayed outward. Then I was folded, strapped tight, and left standing in the corner near the door, dripping. The house was dry, quiet. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking clock above the hallway, footsteps moving away. The floor beneath me absorbed the water I couldn't shake off. I leaned slightly to one side. Gravity settled me. Days passed before the next storm. I remained closed in the corner, fabric wrinkled from incomplete drying. A faint stiffness had formed along one fold line. It resisted when flexed, like material remembering pressure. The door opened abruptly. Rain again. I was grabbed without inspection, opened mid-stride. This time the mechanism stuck longer. They forced it. A sharp jerk snapped the final rib into place. A thin tearing sound whispered through the fabric near one seam. It was small, insignificant. I held. Wind pressed hard, harder than before. My misaligned rib flexed differently under load. The stress redistributed unevenly. The canopy trembled, not from fear, but from structural imbalance. I compensated. That is what structure does. The rain found the weak seam. Water slipped through a gap that hadn't existed before. A drop landed on the shoulder beneath me. The hand adjusted, tilted me slightly. Not to protect me, to correct coverage. Another gust. One hinge buckled momentarily. I felt the metal strain past its preferred threshold. A sharp internal vibration traveled down my shaft. Still intact, still useful. They leaned into me more aggressively now. I wasn't just a shield. I was a barrier, forced into direct opposition with the weather. The wind pushed, I resisted. The resistance grew slower. When they closed me this time, the grinding was louder. The spring didn't retract smoothly. It caught halfway before snapping shut with a forceful clack. That sound echoed in the entryway. No comment. I was placed back in the corner, but not upright. This time I was tossed onto the floor. I lay horizontally, fabric pressed against tile. One rib slightly bent outward from the circle, creating a subtle distortion when viewed from above. I assessed the shape. Still circular. Close enough. Another week. Clear skies. I remained untouched. Dust settled on my handle. The stiffness in my fold deepened. The seam that had whispered before now displayed a visible thread, loosened at the edge. It brushed against the tile when I was shifted accidentally by a passing shoe. It didn't break. Not yet. When the storm returned, it was worse. Thunder rolled through the house before the door opened. Urgency in the footsteps. They didn't check me. They just grabbed and ran. I opened under tension. The bent rib resisted alignment. It clicked loudly before locking into a slightly warped arc. The canopy shape was no longer symmetrical. Wind slammed into me immediately. The pressure was uneven now. One quadrant absorbed more force than the others. Fabric strained at the compromised seam. The thread pulled tighter with each gust. Rain poured. Not a shower, a sustained assault. Water pushed through the weakened area faster. A steady drip formed inside my coverage area. The shoulder beneath shifted again. I was angled more aggressively into the wind. My shaft flexed. That flex was new, a micro-bend forming under cumulative stress. I held, because that is what I do. The next gust was violent. It inverted me fully. All ribs flipped upward. The joints screamed under torque. The bent rib twisted further, deforming beyond its original arc. Fabric snapped audibly near the seam. They wrestled me back into shape, forced the ribs down one by one. One refused to seat correctly. They shoved harder. Metal scraped metal. It locked, but crooked. Rain kept falling. By the time we reached shelter, my canopy sagged visibly on one side. Water pooled instead of rolling off cleanly. The seam had split a few centimeters. Not a tear wide enough to expose emptiness, just enough to let water insist on entry. They closed me roughly. This time, the spring didn't fully engage. I remained slightly open, as if resisting collapse. They forced it shut with both hands. A small piece of metal snapped inside. I felt the absence of tension. Something essential had detached. Back in the house, I was not placed in the corner. I was dropped near the doormat. Wet, half closed. Days passed. No storms. No need. A new object appeared by the door. Compact, black, sleek. Its fabric taut. Its joint silent. Its spring immediate and clean. I observed it. It did not observe me. The next rain came quickly. They reached down, paused. Their hand hovered over me briefly, then shifted, picked up the new one, opened it effortlessly. No grinding, no hesitation. They stepped into the storm. The door closed. I remained, half folded. Water stains dried along my canopy in uneven patches. The bent rib protruded slightly against the fabric, creating a small ridge. The split seam widened marginally as the material contracted during drying. These were structural adjustments. Natural. I leaned against the wall. Time thickened. When they returned, the new one was shaken gently, closed smoothly, placed upright in the corner. I was nudged aside with a foot. Not aggressively, just repositioned. My handle now faced the wall. I could not see the door directly anymore. Days became weeks. The new one left frequently, returned wet, returned dry. Always upright, always ready. I was occasionally moved when cleaning occurred, lifted without inspection, set down again. Once I was picked up, turned in the hands, opened. The mechanism resisted immediately. They forced it. 3 ribs extended. 2 followed reluctantly. The bent one failed to align. The canopy opened lopsided. Light passed clearly through the split seam. They examined it silently, closed me again, this time gently, placed me not by the door, but inside a closet, dark, horizontal, on top of boxes that smelled of disuse. The air was dry here, still. No storms reached this space, no pressure, no wind. I listened to muffled sounds outside, the new one leaving, returning, opening, closing. My fabric stiffened further without regular tension cycles. The bent rib remained fixed in its distorted arc. The broken internal spring piece no longer provided resistance. My shaft maintained its microbend, subtle but permanent. I remained intact, functional in principle. Time passed in silence. One afternoon, the closet opened. Light cut through darkness. Hands reached in, not searching for me, searching for space. Boxes were removed. I was lifted along with them, set aside on the floor. The new one stood by the door as always. The hand picked me up, looked at me longer than before. Thumb pressed against the split seam. It widened under minimal pressure. A quiet exhale. Not anger, not frustration, just recognition. They tried to open me one last time. The mechanism jammed halfway. 2 ribs extended. One snapped outward loosely, no longer anchored properly. Fabric tore along the weakened line. A clean rip. Not dramatic, just final. They didn't attempt to fix it. They didn't curse. They didn't sigh again. I was folded awkwardly, not fully closed, carried past the door, past the new one, out into the open air. There was no storm. Clear sky, sunlight, bright. They walked to the trash bin at the end of the driveway. Lid opened. I was dropped inside. Landed against cardboard and plastic. The lid closed. Dark again. No pressure, no wind, no rain. Silence. I waited for the next storm. It did not come.